Dan Barleser is in talks to join Derby County as his deal looks to expire in 2026. The 28-year-old midfielder has played under Paul Warne at previous club Rotherham United and looks to join Derby County and show those players in the dressing room what Paul Warne desires. We've done it previously with Connor Washington, and this looks like another deal which is set to do the same thing. Dan Barleser is rumoured to be a fairly decent player according to Middlesbrough fans, and a player who Derby County fans should be excited to bring in. I know a lot of people will be talking down this signing due to the fact that he previously played at Rotherham, but he's been at Middlesbrough since 2023, and I do believe that Middlesbrough wouldn't have signed a player that isn't very good. Now, at 28 years old, he is coming towards sort of the twilight years of his career. He's pretty much in his peak right now, and he's not really going to get any better. Now, ultimately, these are the types of players that Derby County need. I spoke about it when it comes to Matt Clark. What we need in this team is experienced championship players. We need experienced championship know-how. Don't get me wrong, having some youth in there as well to sort of engage with that experience would be wonderful, but we have to make sure that we get results, and that's what's going to come from bringing in a player like Dan Barleser. Over the course of this season, he's made 22 appearances, scoring once and assisting once, playing 1,331 minutes across all competitions. Now, Dan Barleser overall is a very decent player. I don't necessarily think he's the type of player that we necessarily need. He isn't what I'd call a workhorse. I think he has a good ability and will really help to dictate the play at Derby County, whether that be next to Ebo Adams or David Ozo. Obviously, if we look at his positional chart, he plays anywhere really centrally. He can play in those other positions. I'm assuming he's done that under Paul Warne in the past. He's made 151 appearances in central midfield, 14 goals, 16 assists, 149 appearances in that holding midfield role with 12 goals and 25 assists. Now, for me, this signing isn't necessarily one that's going to blow your socks off, but if we were to go down, for example, Dan Barleser ultimately would be an unbelievable player to have in our midfield, and judging by the fact of our other deals that seem to be going on with Matt Clark, that looks to be a loan deal. You look at other deals that are going on for us as well. We're going to need a winger. We're going to potentially need another striker with Dejon Brown's injury. And we're going to have to wait and see how those deals set out. But ultimately, we have the 5 loans. Once Matt Clark signs, he hasn't done that yet. But if he has, you'll obviously have seen a video about it. And Dan Barleser does have experience, a wealth of experience. He's played 124 games in the Championship, 6 goals, 15 assists, and 110 games in League One, 13 goals and 12 assists. Not necessarily the player that Derby County maybe need for Paul Warne, because Paul Warne loves that high energy, high intensity, athletic type of player. But I see Dan Barleser as more of that sort of technical minded City midfielder, and we are going to have to wait and see what does happen with it. He's obviously valued at around €2.5 million, which means it's going to be quite an expensive deal. But with Erin Cash in at the moment, it hasn't been confirmed that he's gone. Looking set to move out of Derby County and potentially bring in around £15 million in total, 10 million to start off with. There's a guaranteed fee and then up to 15 million in add-ons. That £2.5 million doesn't necessarily seem like a crazy amount of money. Ultimately, for me, I think you obviously look at some of the players we've looked at, the likes of Jadon Montour. You go to like the Oscar Frulos of the world and those players around in Europe, and you think, could Derby County get better than Barlaser, a little bit younger and further afield, a little bit cheaper? And the answer probably is yes, but ultimately you're then bringing in unproven players to a Championship relegation battle where ultimately I think we're 7 defeats on the trot now, and it's very difficult to see how those untested, unproven players are going to be able to sort of break into the team and sort of break the mould of results that Derby County have got going on. In my opinion, I believe that I'd prefer to play a couple of youngsters, not than sign players. Obviously I'd like players to come in, but it's one of those for me where if you don't bring in a player with experience and you bring in those unproven talents, people are then going to complain. But ultimately, if you bring in an unproven talent that goes on to be a world beater, you then hit the jackpot, don't you? So it's one of those for me where I think Paul Warne's in a bit of a difficult position. The recruitment team are in a difficult position. There's a lot of thought that could go into this where sort of Derby County bring in experienced heads to sort of get us through to the end of the season. We get through to the end of the season, and then ultimately we bring in newer, younger players over the course of the summer window if we were to stay up, or even if we weren't. Now, it does seem a common theme across the course of Paul Warne's career that he signs a lot of aging players, let's say, sort of towards the peak years of their career, rather than giving those youngsters the opportunity. And this is sort of the problem that I seem to have. Obviously brought in Kenzo Heldmine, who's a youngster. Kane Wilson was quite young as well. And it's not that he doesn't sign youngsters, it's that he doesn't really give them that chance to shine. And if they don't shine straight away, they don't necessarily get to continue having opportunities like maybe some of the more experienced players like a Mendes Lang or a Caden Jackson or something like that. We've even really seen it with Corey Blackett-Taylor, who is not necessarily a young player, but ultimately had a bit of a stinker to start with and ultimately hasn't really been able to get back into the side. It's a difficult conversation to have really with Derby County, Paul Warne, Middlesbrough, Dan Barleser, because there's a lot that could happen with this deal. Realistically, for me, it has to be a permanent. Derby County need to make permanent signings, because whether we stay up, go down, we've got players leaving in the summer. Your likes of Barlaser, Thompson's out of contract, Washington's out of contract, albeit hasn't played. And we're going to have to replace those bodies in the squad. And you even look at players who, if we were to go down, there's going to be players that want to leave. Zetterstrom will probably want to move on. Kenzo will probably want to move on. I can't see Kane Wilson signing a new deal if we go down. And this is the problem that we have at Derby County. We've got a lot of players that can play at this level, that know they can play at this level, that are sort of being struck down by the system we're playing and things like that. Now, obviously, Dan Barleser has an amazing opportunity at a future at Derby County with potentially 4, 5, 6 years ahead of him until the end of his career. Will he spend them all at Derby County? Will he even make that move to Derby County? Obviously, only initial talks have taken place according to John Percy. I think there's a brilliant opportunity here for Derby County, but it's one of those that is going to be looked down upon because of that situation at Rotherham. Obviously, played 152 games there, 17 goals, 25 assists. Obviously came through at Middlesbrough, making loan spells at Crewe Alexandra and Accrington. Now, I'm not against the signing. I'm not opposed to it. I think it adds a wealth of championship experience that we maybe don't have in that midfield. But it's one of those for me where we've signed players like this in the past. It hasn't necessarily worked. Sort of looking for the last sort of decent contract. We will have to see what the situation is come later on today. You'll be watching this on the 29th. And it's one of those for me where Derby County are in a really, really sticky situation. With obviously players moving out like Erin Cashin. We obviously let go of James Collins and Sonny Bradley, Ben Radcliffe. All players who people would probably argue now could help Derby County given their injury situations, especially a player like Ben Radcliffe and Sonny Bradley who could have slotted in that centre-half position. Now, Barlaser will improve the depth in Derby County's midfield. He will add some extra quality, but is he the player that Derby County need? Does he really add goals to that midfield? I personally don't believe so, but will he add a little bit of a creative spark? I think there's certainly a possibility. Obviously, you can let me know your thoughts down in the comments. This Dan Barleser deal, I'm sort of a bit all over the place with it. I'm not quite sure how to feel. I think the value of the deal will sort of sway me whichever way. So obviously let me know your thoughts down below. Hit the subscribe button, turn on that notification bell, and I'll catch you in my next video.